All right, welcome back. So today we are going to be talking about establishment of Christianity in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. But in this video, I'm going to try my best possible to cover Sierra Leone. So before we can talk about the establishment of Christianity in Sierra Leone, we need to mention the revival, the evangelical revival that happened in Europe. At a point, if you remember when we were talking about Portuguese effort in Christianizing Africa, we mentioned that they were involved in slave trade, and the moment Africans, realized that they were trading them, they were actually exchanging them for their goods and trading them as slaves. They started resisting them, from penetrating into Africa to preach. Just like rebelling, right? So at a point, there was something that happened that actually changed the whole scenario, whereby they had to abolish slave trade. And the moment they abolished slave trade, the missionaries, the traders as well, they needed to look for other means, to get into Africa since slave trade has been abolished. So that's what we'll be talking about in this particular topic. What led to the abolishment of slave trade? How did Christianity, how did it get revived, in Europe? So I'm just going to be reading through the notes so that I'll be able to cover much. Right, so let's just get right into it. So the first subtopic that we have here is the evangelical revival in Europe and America. So the close of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century is a period of gloom and darkness for the church. What this means is that at that particular time, the church was no longer functioning as it were. There was like a coldness. People were no longer trusting God. The commitment has totally reduced. So across Europe, the Catholic Church was in a weak position. It was largely controlled by the government, right? So the government seized the majority of the church lands, and when there is no church, where will people go to worship? So the peasants, that's the poor, the peasant class continues to be devoted, but they had no voice. Even in France, the French Revolution of the 1790s. So to explain to you what I mean by 18th century, 17th century again. So when you see 1790s, in case you cannot remember the year, what should come to your mind is that this is the 18th century. So in this situation, we have 1790s. So you can call it the late 18th century, right? But anything from, let's say, 1700 to 1749, you call it the early 18th century. I hope you get that. All right, so essentially shutting down the Catholic Church, seizing and selling its properties, closing its monasteries and schools, and exiling most of the leaders. So that's what led to the coldness. When there are no leaders, imagine when a church that has a pastor and then the government took the pastor away, definitely the church members will run away, right? So let's continue. So during this period, the thinking of Europeans changed towards God and religion. Some believe that God can be known and understood through nature or reasoning and not through biblical revelation. The church lost control because the clergy were negligent and worldly. The clergy were, when you hear clergy, that's the pastors, they were also misbehaving. So the morality of the church became decayed during this dark period of religious decadence. For example, in England, drunkenness was rampant, gambling was spreading like a wildfire amongst bad behaviors. So in the early 18th century, the spiritual revival burst out, and this revival renewed the zeal and commitment on the part of the Christian. So when they say there's a revival, it's just like saying that people have been cold, but right now their commitment to God, became fresh. It became fresh. So there's a spiritual revival that it burst out, and then this revival renewed the zeal and commitment on the part of the Christian to preach the gospel. So now they started preaching the gospel again. As a result of this revival, one of the ordained Anglican clergymen, George Whitefield, got converted and began to preach in London and Bristol. He preached in the open field, and large crowds gathered to hear the message of salvation. So as an advanced student studying CRS, you should know the names of these people. You should know those details. So another spiritually dead clergyman was John Wesley, who later became the founder of Methodism. So he was also revived during this revival period, although he never intended to form a separate church. Wesley, though was traveling around to convert souls, but he was still struggling with his own sinfulness. But eventually he met with a Moravian immigrant, which he met the person on the ship going to Georgia, and the person was Peter Bola. He counseled Wesley, and Wesley, became saved completely again. He experienced God's saving grace, and afterwards Wesley ministered to the poor in prisons, hospitals, workhouses, and all. And he began to travel to preach the gospel, right? So this evangelical revival has great effect on West Africa as regards planting of Christianity. The revival led to establishment of missionary society. So we have the Baptist Missionary Society in 1792. We have Church Missionary Society in 1799 called the CMS. We have the Wesleyan Methodist Society in 1813. All these missionaries played one role or the other in planting Christianity in West Africa. And that's why I realized that till today we still have all these Protestant churches. We have the Anglican, which is called the Church Missionary Society. We have the African Church. We have the Methodist Church. We still have the Baptist Church in this era. So the revival led to the abolition of slave trade. Slavery was considered as a cruel and inhuman practice that should be abolished at all costs. Also, the revival led to the establishment of Freetown in Sierra Leone, where the free slaves were catered for in the coast of West Africa. So let's get right. Let me just explain this. So what happened was that they started the clamor for abolition of slave trade, and eventually it was accepted, and slave trade was abolished. So meanwhile, while it was abolished, they were already bringing some slaves from Africa. So when they heard the news of the abolishment of slave trade, there was this their means of transportation was through water, right? So they had a port. It's just like when you say that you have like a border where let's say you are traveling out of Nigeria now. There's a border where you drop and then you enter the bus out to another country. Let's say you are going to like Benin Republic, you enter another bus, right? So now they have a port whereby when they get to this port, they drop them from the ship and they enter another ship, according to my understanding of the story. And that was where Sierra Leone was, and they had to leave those slaves there. That's why they call the place Freetown, right? And now it's called Sierra Leone. So the revival led to the establishment of Freetown in Sierra Leone, where the free slaves were catered for in the coast of West Africa. So to end with, schools were established in Freetown to train personnel for evangelical work in West Africa. For example, we have the Fora Bay College, which is still existing, and the revival also put an end to inhuman activities in Africa, e.g. the human sacrifice and killing of twins. Remember that I'm using my textbook for this class, so if you need to get a copy, I'm going to put my number in the description box. You can just chat me up and I will find a way for you to get to you a token. All right, so let's look at the founding of Sierra Leone and the role of anti-slavery movement in founding Sierra Leone. So the role of the anti-slavery movement cannot be underemphasized. Due to the anti-slavery movement led by Granville Sharp, so there are people that actually led this anti-slavery movement, like we need to stop slavery. We have the likes of Granville Sharp, we have William Wilberforce in 1807. So due to the anti-slavery movement, the spread of Christianity was made easy, as the fear many of the local people had towards the white men was allayed. The people no longer saw the missionaries as slave dealers because it had stopped, right? So now they welcomed them more. So they were warmly received into their midst. Many of the early slaves became instrumental to the spread of the gospel, as they were more favorably received by them. Examples of such early slaves are, we have Samuel Ajayi Crowther and John Christopher Taylor. So a group of free slaves arrived in Sierra Leone from England in 1787 to form a settlement. So now, when they already the slavery has been abolished, those already slaves in England, were freed by their masters, so they had to return back to their country, which is Africa. So the group of free slaves actually arrived in Sierra Leone called Freetown in 1787, all right, to form a settlement. It failed but was revived by the Sierra Leone Company, a commercial company sponsored by English opponent of the slave trade. So the black settlers who had liberated themselves from African slavery were brought over from Nova Scotia and built a new settlement named Freetown. Alright, so after the British Parliament made the slave trade illegal in 1807, the British government took over the settlement as a naval base against the slave trade and as a center to which slaves captured in transit across the Atlantic could be brought and freed. So that's what I was saying, that British made like a naval base at that particular place in Sierra Leone. So any slave that they are bringing, they have to like stop them at that particular place. So between 1807 and 1884, when the last slave ship case was adjudicated in the Freetown court, the British Navy brought in more They brought in more than 50,000 captives, also known as liberated Africans, drawn from all over Western Africa. So these heterogeneous people lacked any common language or culture. They are from different places in Africa, so they do not have a common language, and they have to make sure that they speak a common language, in Sierra Leone, where they gather all of them. So at that particular place in Sierra Leone, we had different missionaries coming there to preach them, right? So we had Protestant missionaries and other missionary bodies, along with the black pastors of Christian churches, work with such success that within a generation the policy was virtually fulfilled. The Church Missionary Society, also called Anglican, founded an institution to train teachers and missionaries at that Sierra Leone called Forabe College, which was affiliated to the University of Durham in England. The society also opened boys and girls secondary schools. The recaptives and their children, known as Creoles, prospered as traders, and some entered the profession. So those slaves too, they entered professions. Some became doctors, lawyers, all right, and then they formed educated West African elite. Notable examples include James Alton, who qualified as a doctor and served as an officer in the British Army. We also have Samuel Ajay Crowther, who married an African woman, and she was also released from the same slave ship as himself, and he became the first African to be ordained as an Anglican priest. So now, reasons for the founding of Sierra Leone. Why was Sierra Leone founded? One of the major reasons for founding Sierra Leone was for religious purposes. The missionaries were consumed with zeal to spread the gospel of Christ to West Africa. So they believed Sierra Leone could be a starting ground. That's where all the slaves are dropped, right? So also they had intention to trade with the people to replace the abolished slave trade and to know more about the inland of West Africa. So they believe that these slaves can lead them back to Africa, right? And there they can now do another form of business instead of the slave trade that has been abolished. So planting of Christianity in Sierra Leone was also to give room for scientific exploitation and to also sign treaties with local areas in West Africa. So reasons why Sierra Leone was established, we already said religion purposes, number 2 for business purposes, number 3 for scientific exploitation, and to sign agreement with their local leaders. So to end with, we have the missionaries' activities of the free slaves in Sierra Leone. What were the things that those missionaries did? So there were several missionary groups in Sierra Leone. We have the Quakers, the Nova Scotians, the Baptist Mission, the Methodist Mission, and the Church Missionary Society. So let's just look at it very quickly. The Quakers, also known as Society of Friends, what did they do? The Quakers provided shelter, food, clothing, materials for the slaves. They also built schools where they encouraged the teaching of African language, e.g. Anna Kilham arrived in Sierra Leone from England after studying Wolof and Mandinka, 2 indigenous West African languages, and he taught them. The Quakers also advocated for the use of African languages to teach African children instead of English. All right, let's quickly move on. We have the Nova Scotians. So they are Negroes, they are also black, who fought on the side of the British in the African War of Independence. After the war, these Negroes were settled in Nova Scotia in Canada. They therefore requested for admission to the Sierra Leone because they identified themselves as black, right? And their request was granted. So Nova Scotians were the first to establish schools in Sierra Leone before the British government established theirs. This school provides evangelists, teachers, and Christian workers. They preach to the liberated slaves and convert many. They provided a ready-made Christian community before the arrival of the European missionaries. Then we have the Baptist Mission. They also came to Sierra Leone in 1792. The mission began under a Negro pastor, David George, and they built a church and established a congregation. If you need to read through the notes, you can just pause the video and read through the notes, all right? Because I don't want it to be more than 15 minutes. All right, so we have the Methodist Mission. What did they do? They got Sierra Leone in 1792 with Nova Scotians. Their official mission work started in 1811 with the arrival of George Warren and 3 school teachers. Due to unforeseen circumstances like the death of Warren 8 months after they got to Sierra Leone, the missionary work failed, but they actually still sent more missionaries, to complete their work. And in 1895, mission stations were opened at Limba, Temne, and Chebo. So that would be that about this particular video. Like I said, if you need the textbook, you can chat me up or call me. And then if you found this video useful, please give me a thumbs up, and you can also on your notification button so you can know when I drop the next video, and please subscribe to the channel. And if there's anything you like me to do to make this video better, to be able to serve you well, kindly use the comment section. All right, thank you for watching this video. Bye.